Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And welcome everybody, Hands-On Apologetics. You have entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo, and it's great to be with you today as we, as always, look at how to explain, defend the faith with clarity, charity, and confidence. And, got a great show in store for us because we're going to ask the question and hear the answer to what in the world would make a Protestant minister, Protestant pastor, become Catholic? Well, we're going to have Keith Nestor on, who did just that. He was a evangelical minister who was quite at home where he was, but God had other plans for him. And not only is he now Catholic, but he's doing some remarkable work, educating Catholics on the faith and defending the faith, and has a great podcast ministry. So we're going to have Keith come on the other side of the break, and he's going to tell us his journey, tell us his story about how God took him from where he was and put him where he is right now. And so that's going to be a lot of fun. Also, as always, every episode we sharpen our critical thinking skills by examining an informal fallacy. Today's informal fallacy, by the way, is the fallacy of the complex question, or otherwise known as push questions. And trust me, with election season being as it is, we're very familiar with push questions, so we'll talk a little bit about that. Also, we meet an early church father. Today's early church father, I would bet dollars to donuts that probably no one listening to me right now ever heard of him. He's Faustinus. Faustinus, the early church father. So we'll learn a little bit about this somewhat obscure early church father, but that's the beauty of these segments, because it increases our knowledge of the early church, and then the early church is so important in terms of evidence for the Catholic faith going all the way back to the apostles. So, as always, I start off the show by welcoming all of you who may be watching live stream on Facebook, YouTube, all the other platforms that we live stream on. Welcome aboard, everybody. Also, I want to welcome all of you listening on radio stations around the United States, and also via podcasts around the world through either our handy-dandy phone app or our flamethrower website, virginmostpowerfulradio.org. Welcome aboard, folks. It always floors me when I hear people who are outside the continental United States listening to the program. It's just so cool. It reminds me of how the church truly is Catholic, and so it's awesome to hear from our brothers and sisters from across the sea. Also, if you have a question, you can give us a call at 888-526-2151. That is 888-526-2151. And also, here's the Dojo mailbox if you want to send me an email. Perhaps you have questions, comments, just want to share what's going on in your life. Maybe you're dialoguing with someone, not really sure where to go in your discussion. I'd love to hear from you. The official Dojo mailbox is questions@handsonapologetics.com. And that goes directly to me, and I do answer all your emails. So thank you in advance for those who are going to email. Also, has become our practice since the whole COVID thing. Remember, even if you're stationed in place, you can still evangelize in place. You can use social media as an outreach. And there's many ways you can do it. There's so many great resources. One way you can do it that also helps us here at Virgin Most Powerful Radio is tell people about the shows. If you hear something on Jesus 911 or Hands-On Apologetics, Jerry and Jesse show, tell your friends about it. Share. Go on our website, go up to our shows, scroll down to the show you want. You get all the shows there. You can share it with your friends. Tell people about it. Also, if you could smash that subscribe, the like, the bell, all that stuff on social media, what that does is it increases our visibility, which enables us to reach more people for Christ. So that's a very important thing. And I know many, many of you have done that, and I thank you for it. And I want to thank all of those who are about to do it in advance. Thank you so much, because it doesn't cost anything, and you can evangelize with a click of a mouse. It doesn't get any easier than that. All right, so without further ado, why don't we jump to our Finding the Fallacy segment, which is push questions, also known as fallacy of complex question. The fallacy of phrasing a question in a context that, by the way it's worded, assumes something not contractually granted, assumes something not in evidence, or assumes a false dichotomy. A question presupposing some state of affairs is posed. Okay, so in other words, it's the way you frame the question that you're sneaking in with that question all sorts of luggage that hasn't been discussed or argued or any evidence is given. For example, somebody could ask you a question. Do you believe in salvation by human effort, or do you believe it's by God alone? Well, that's a dichotomy that's kind of being snuck in there. Can't God alone produce salvation through human effort? I mean, after all, the good things we do, are that not the product of God's grace who strengthens us? So there's all sorts of things you can smuggle in with questions. And that can color the person's perception or try to corner them into a no-win situation. And like I said, push questions, that is just part of the currency of political advertising. You get phone calls asking push questions that will denigrate one candidate and lionize the other. In apologetics, it is used. It's certainly used on a popular level. I think people inadvertently use these push questions or complex questions for evangelism. They're like little verbal tricks to kind of trip somebody up. So just be aware of it. You could always point, if someone ever gives you a push question, all you need to do is step back and ask them a question. Start saying, well, why do you think there's a dichotomy here if there isn't? Or why do you think such and such is the case? And then argue about the evidence for that. And that is, ladies and gentlemen, our Finding the Fallacy for today, push questions. Let's move to the early church father for today, who is Faustinus. Faustinus, we first make an acquaintance with him with Saint Lucifer of Cagliari. A very odd name for a saint, but yeah, that's apparently a convert from paganism. The bishop of the Church of Sardinia. Lucifer was one of the West's most adamant defenders of the Orthodox Nicene doctrine. When the unfortunate Council of Milan condemned St. Athanasius, Lucifer refused to be a party of such treachery against such a great man, and in his intransigence, he was sent to exile in the East in 355 AD. To this point, he was a most honorable man. When Arianism was finally carried to its logical and abominable conclusion in Anomianism, which is a term meant to express the view that the Father and the Son are unlike in all things, the Nicene party saw it absolutely necessary to close ranks and retrench. So there's a kind of peace that was affected between themselves, the people who affirmed that the Son is of the same substance as the Father, known as homoousians, and those who formerly regarded as enemies of the Church, who espoused that he was of like substance, or homoousians. It was admitted that many of the latter, the ones who said that he was like the Father, were perfectly orthodox in their thinking, but they used unorthodox terminology. So in the face of a real enemy of genuine Arianism, the Nicene men were able to abandon their quarrel over terminology and close ranks against the Arians. In short, So a quarrel which had, in the course of time, truly became no more than an argument over words. So, in short, a man might now still cling to the homoousion-like substance, yet be understand it in a perfectly orthodox sense. At this point, this is where Lucifer, the homoousion, the same substance, probably should have yielded and joined ranks along with them. But in fact, he refused. He became a schismatic, and his followers were known as Luciferians. By the way, this is not to be confused with modern Luciferians. This is a totally different thing. And they continued in his schism for about 25 years until his death, which is around 390. Lucifer was inflexible, but a good man for all of that, and his native Sardinia calls him a saint. He actually enjoys a local cult and is given honors at the altar. Faustinus was a follower of this sect known as the Luciferians, and we have one work from him that comes down from antiquity on the Trinity. Faustinus is the sole author on the Trinity, and he shows himself very much a better theologian than Lucifer, whose language was often hilariously intemperate, and who was, for all his zeal, hardly more than a pamphleteer. Lucifer is of some importance linguistically, however, because the language in which he wrote was common street Latin. Now, Faustinus' work on the Trinity is in 7 short books, the 7th being devoted to the theology of the Holy Spirit, in a refutation of what's known as the Pneumatomachien Macedonians who denied the divinity of the Holy Spirit. And that's our early church father today, Faustinus. Coming up next, we're going to be chatting with Keith Nestor. Stay tuned, folks.
Sirach 11:24 says, "Do not say, I am self-sufficient. What harm can come to me now?" According to St. Catherine of Siena, presumption is like vermin burrowing at the root of the tree of our soul. If we do not uproot it with great care and humility, it will eventually destroy the soul. May God keep us from all presumption of mind and heart, and realize that we depend on Him for everything.
Did you know my mom's gonna have a baby?
She is? Will it be a boy? Or will it be a girl?
We don't know yet, but we heard the heartbeat and my dad said this is gonna be someone very special.
You mean like being a president? Or maybe a doctor?
Well, probably maybe like a singer or dancer, I think.
Hello, my name is Marianne Koharski. I'm the director of Pro-Life Across America. We know that every baby is a miracle and has the potential to do great things. If you know someone who is pregnant or in need of alternatives or assistance, or would like to support the work of Pro-Life Across America, please call 1-800-366-7773 or visit our website at prolifeacrossamerica.org. Pro-Life Across America is non-political and totally educational.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for your support here at Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Here's an easy way to do it. If you're going to sell or buy a house, call Real Estate for Life, 877-543-3871, because they're going to get you a Christ-centered agent to purchase your home or to sell your home. And at the close of escrow, a portion of his commission goes right back to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Call 877-543-3871. Thank you so much for your support.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody, to Hands On Apologetics. Now, what in the world would make a Protestant pastor become Catholic? Well, the answer is God. And to help explain his journey of faith into the Catholic Church, we have Keith Nestor with us. He's a former pastor, youth pastor for more than 20 years in full-time ministry. Keith has served in United Methodist, Assemblies of God, and Evangelical Free Churches in various roles. And in 2017, after a 20-year-long discernment process, Keith resigned his full-time ministry position and joined the Catholic Church. He's also the author of the book, The Convert's Guide to Roman Catholicism, Your First Year in the Church. And Keith, welcome to Hands On Apologetics.
Thanks for having me, Gary. How are you today?
Oh, I am doing fine. You know, it's always fun to do apologetics, and especially to hear somebody's journey of faith, because God's amazing. And I can't wait to hear your story. How are you doing, by the way?
I'm doing great. It's good to be with you. And that's, my journey of faith is one of my favorite things to talk about, not because I think I have anything important about myself, but because, you said it in the introduction, why would somebody do this for God? And anytime I get a chance to point somebody to God, it's a good day.
Amen. Yeah. Yeah. Very good. So let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
Where did you start? Did you grow up in a religious home?
Yeah, so my dad is a retired United Methodist pastor. So I grew up, I was the PK, which means preacher's kid. I found that a lot of Catholics don't know what that means, but which for a good reason. But when you're you're growing up in the church, in the Protestant church, the PK, that's what it means, pastor's kid. And so I grew up going to church. I always felt like I had a love of Jesus and God. It was just sort of built into who I was. But for me, I guess that moment where I feel like I gave my heart to Jesus was at church camp when I was 10 or 11 years old. And I went forward and said a prayer because the pastor asked the question, if you died tonight, do you know that you'd go to heaven? And I said, I don't know. I think I would. Well, if you want to know for sure, then come forward and pray this prayer. And so I did that, and like a lot of people have done. And that's when I would, at the time, say my faith journey began. But growing up, that's kind of how it was for me.
Yeah. Now, were you a typical PK with all the baggage with that, or were you a good one?
I don't know. I guess if you ask my dad, he'd probably give you a different answer, but I think I was pretty typical. I was pretty rambunctious. I didn't like having those expectations put on me that I have to be the perfect kid. So I probably did a few things to make sure that I wasn't. But I had a great relationship with my parents, and I liked going to church. It wasn't something that I didn't enjoy. It was just part of who I was. It was part of my life. So, I guess, I liked it. When I was in high school, I didn't really go. It was weird. My parents didn't make me go to church with them. So sometimes I'd go to other churches. Sometimes I wouldn't go. Sometimes I would. It was kind of just sort of up to me. I followed that sort of pattern that a lot of kids have. You go through confirmation / graduation from church, and then you can sort of choose for yourself whether you're going to go. And, I did sometimes, but I would have always considered myself a Christian, a strong Christian, even though church wasn't necessarily like at the center of everything I did.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, so coming from a Methodist tradition, church attendance, I imagine, would be something more important than, say, a Baptist. Or am I wrong on that?
I don't know. I guess, there's so many different kinds of Baptists. I think it probably depends on the kind of Baptist that you talk about. I felt like in my family, it was basically mandatory. Like that's what we did until I got to be about maybe 15 or 16. Then my parents sort of let the reins up a little bit on me and on my sisters. And it was sort of like, you can go if you want to, if you feel like it, but it wasn't like rammed down my throat at that point in time.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. So you go to high school and, things loosen up a bit. I bet you're confronted with did you go to Christian high school?
No, I went to a public high school.
Okay.
And for me, those years of my life with regard to my faith, I considered myself a Christian. I really wanted to follow God. but I was searching for like, where do I fit in? So I would go to lots of different churches. Like I went to youth group at an Assemblies of God church for a while. I went to a Baptist church for a while. I sort of like tried to explore for myself what my church situation was going to be. And I never really felt like I landed anywhere while I was in high school. It was maybe a little bit later that I kind of felt like I found where I wanted to be in that.
Yeah. So were you able to hold on to your faith through high school and going into college?
Yeah, I certainly wasn't perfect, but I never had that moment where I was like, oh, I'm not a Christian anymore. I always considered myself a Christian, and that motivated a lot of the things I did and didn't do. But I didn't really have that experience where I like walked away from the faith and had to come back to it. I would have said, that was very important to me all throughout high school, but it really wasn't connected so much to my church. It was connected to other experiences I was having, youth groups I was going to, and just my relationship with my parents was good in that. But I wasn't like involved in our church too much. It just wasn't something that I was really that excited about. Because I loved like rock music. I was a drummer. I liked things that were exciting. And my parents' church was an okay church, but it wasn't like musically, it wasn't what I was into. So I didn't really find a place there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, the drummer, that's awesome. God loves the percussion section. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So when did you start feeling the call to ministry?
Well, I tried to kind of like run away from that for a while because I was really involved in this church camp in the summer times that I would go to, and I would spend most of my summers there. And a lot of people said to me, you might want to think about ministry someday. And I was like, no way. I want to be in a band. I want to play drums. I want to pursue that professionally. So I actually dropped out of college a couple different times and found myself kind of traveling around pursuing music. And I wound up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which was a far cry from where I grew up in Iowa, playing drums in a band, trying to just pursue that 100%. And ministry happened when I was going to a Calvary Chapel, which I really loved that church. And the pastor, he was preaching about Abraham and Isaac, and he talked about, is there anything in your life more important to you than your relationship with God? And I just knew it was like, well, yeah, my musical ambitions. And I sort of gave myself to Christ again that one night and said, okay, if you want me to do something different with my life, then I will. I just don't know what it is. And then it was like 2 days later, I got a call from a friend of mine who was a pastor back in Iowa who needed a youth pastor at his church. And I was like, oh man, God's calling my bluff. And so I went out and I interviewed for that job, and for some ridiculous reason they gave it to me, and that's kind of how I got into ministry. But it was tough. It was like another conversion of taking away the thing that I really wanted to do, which was music, and then saying, okay, I'll do ministry. But I had no training. I was a dropout of school at the time. I did finish eventually, but like I had zero training. I had zero ambition to do youth ministry, but it just was put on me.
Wow. So it's just out of the blue.
Pretty much.
It was pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That definitely seems like a sign from God, doesn't it?
I certainly interpret it that way because I really didn't want to do it, and I remember I tried to sabotage my interview. They would ask me questions like, well, Keith, what would you do in this situation if a kid came to you and said this or said that? And I was just like, I don't know. I haven't got a clue. Hey, Keith, why do you want this job in our church? What makes you want to be a youth pastor? And I was like, I really don't. Like, that's what I literally said, Gary. I really don't. I'm just here because I feel like God told me to come here. And they were like, okay, that's great. And then they called me. When I left, I thought, oh, there's no way they're going to want me to do it. And I can go back to Philly and I can pursue my musical stuff. And I can say, well, I tried, God. And then they called and said, Keith, we really think you should come and do this. And I was like, oh man, what am I going to do? But I did it. I said, okay, that's what the Lord's called me to do. I'm going to do it. I'll figure it out and do the best I can.
So were you making money in music? I mean, that was your livelihood, or
not really?
Yeah.
Nope. I was your typical sort of, dreamer. I had this incredible band that I was a part of that was really excellent. And we were playing shows and doing different things, recording stuff. We had an independent record label, put our record out. That's how I actually got into that band. I was good friends with the guy who ran the record company. But I was waiting tables during the day and on nights when we weren't playing because we were chasing that dream, So no, there was definitely no money to be made in what I was doing with that.
Yeah, but you had to lay down your dream, though. I mean,
I did.
That's huge.
And
that's huge.
Yeah,
and
but
to
God's faithful,
pursue a job that you're pursue a job that you really kind of didn't want?
Or it's true because I didn't want it, but once I had it, I could start to see God move in that. And then I felt like, okay, this is something that I'm good at. This is something that I feel God's using me. I mean, we started our little youth group with about 12 kids in a church of about 250 people. And within about 3 years, that little youth group grew to about 300 kids every single Wednesday night.
Wow.
And I was able to use that musical stuff we started a worship band. We recorded our own CD. We traveled around playing in churches and different events. And our youth group just exploded and became this huge monster where people would drive for hours to come to it. It was incredible.
Yeah. Wow. That's so. God really blessed your ministry, and
yeah, he really did. He really did. Which was, the part of the whole part of Catholicism, which I'm sure we'll get to in a minute. That was one of the things that was a struggle for me, was because I had this ministry that was doing so well, and it was like, well, how does Catholicism fit into that? I'm getting ahead of myself, but that's it didn't make it easier. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So you kind of feel like you finally have a place in the church, right? That you're a youth minister and you're successful at it. Was that when you started thinking of getting into, formally into ministry?
Well, yeah. So what I did was I was going to college and seminary at a school in Dubuque, Iowa, and I was pursuing my MDiv. And my thought was, okay, I'm going to be on that track to be a United Methodist pastor, fully invested in all that. And right around that time is when my youth ministry started to blow up. And I had taken every one of the classes I could take on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I was full-time student, full-time ministry. And I got my degree, my bachelor's degree. And then in order for me to continue on with that process, I would have had to quit my job to go. So I was at a crossroads. Like, do I stick with youth ministry or do I go pursue this, ordination in the Methodist Church? And my pastor came to me and said, look, Keith, we want you to continue here. And we want you to know that as far as we're concerned, you're our pastor. And you're if you don't want to pursue that other stuff, we would love to have you continue, because it was sort of conditional. Like I would finish my master's and then pursue the ordination thing and then, whatever. But they wanted me to stay. So I just chose to stay. And so that's the route I went. But once I got that degree, then they sort of elevated my position to more of a pastoral role. So I was preaching every week in the big church. I'd rotate, team teach with the senior pastor, and I had a lot more responsibilities. I was leading worship and in charge of different services. So I basically transitioned at that point in time, basically into, a senior level of ministry at that point.
Yeah, very good. Well, I hear the music coming up. This is a perfect place to stop. We're chatting with Keith Nestor about his journey into the Catholic Church. More to come on the other side of the break, folks. You're listening to Hands On Apologetics. Stay tuned.
A great man once said that evil is powerless if the good are unafraid. Well, you and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness. We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind and his long climb from the swamp to the stars. And it's been said, if we lose this war, and in so doing lose this great way of freedom of ours, history will report with the greatest astonishment that those that had the most to lose did the least to prevent it from happening. Well, I think it's high time now that we ask ourselves if we still even know the freedoms that were intended for us by our founding fathers. Every generation of Americans needs to know that freedom exists, not to do what you like, but having the right to do what you ought. You weren't made to fit in, my brothers and sisters. You are born to stand out. Set yourself apart from this corrupt generation. Be saints. God bless you.
If you shop on Amazon.com, there's an easy way to support Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Just visit smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center under the desired charity. Now, when you log into your Amazon account and purchase products, a portion of it will automatically go to support Virgin Most Powerful Radio at no cost to you. Thanks in advance for supporting CRC and VMPR, and may God richly bless you and your family.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We were chatting with Keith Nestor about his journey into the Catholic Church. And so, Keith, here you are. You're youth pastor. You're kind of moving into more of associate pastor. Things, I guess, are rocking and rolling, right?
Yeah.
When does the other shoe fall?
Well, it was very interesting because, so first of all, like growing up and prior to what I'm about to tell you, I had zero interaction with Roman Catholicism. Like I knew nothing about it other than just the caricatures that a lot of Protestants growing up on the outside have. I didn't understand it. I didn't get any of it. And I would say any of the things that I did know about it were probably misrepresentations that I had learned from anti-Catholic, different types of people. So I was trying to find a logo for our youth ministry, and I called a graphic designer on the phone. And this guy that I talked to, we had this conversation about about the ministry, and he seemed interested, and he agreed to meet with me and to go over some ideas. So I was going to hire this guy. I went over to his house, and when I went over to his house, his name was Devin. I walked into the door of his house, and his house looked like the Sistine Chapel. I mean, they had icons everywhere. He had all this Catholic stuff. There were statues on the porch and all of the things that you see, when you go to someone who's like really strong Catholic, that kind of thing. So immediately I was like, whoa, what is going on here? We sit down, we start talking, and it's apparent to me that this guy loves Jesus. I mean, we're talking about the faith, we're talking about the ministry. And my thought was maybe I can convert this guy and he'll become part of my youth ministry, he'll be one of my volunteers. And he's talking about this, and the longer we talked, I was just having this weird issue. And I just said to him, I said, Devin, I got to ask you a question. Like, you seem like you love Jesus, right? He's like, oh, yeah, absolutely. And I said, well, what's all this Catholic stuff all about? And he just died laughing, and he's like, what do you mean? And I said, I've never met a Catholic before, especially that loves Jesus. So, what's the deal? And he says, well, I'm Catholic. He goes, and that's why I love Jesus. And so we began this conversation, and I started asking him some questions, and I thought, okay, well then I, switched gears. I'm like, well, if I just show this guy a couple of scriptures, then boom, it'll be easy to make him a Protestant. So I started throwing some stuff at him, and then I just asked him this question. I said, Devin, tell me when you were saved. You have a personal relationship with Jesus? Because of course the misconception I had was that Catholics don't believe in being saved. They don't believe in being born again. They don't have a personal relationship with God. They're just following some religious thing. But he could have that, like he could hang with that conversation, and he shared his testimony with me, and I was blown away by it. And we began to talk. And before I left that night, he gave me this, he goes, I got something for you to watch. He goes, this guy was like you, only worse. And he became Catholic. And he hands me the old plastic VHS Scott Hahn conversion story. Which I'm like, okay. So I'm like, all right. So I went home and I watched the Scott Hahn conversion story, and I was just completely blown away. I didn't know what to make of it. And it was incredible. Well, Devin and I began this friendship that was kind of a little rivalry. I would try to convert him to Protestantism. He would try to convert me to Catholicism. And we just began to go. So he would send apologetic stuff to me, and we would have these conversations. But we liked each other. We were friends. But he was the first person I ever met that knew his faith. And a lot of the stuff that he was saying to me, Gary, was really challenging my misconceptions. And not only that, just my whole worldview. I'd never thought about why sola scriptura doesn't make sense. I'd never thought about sacraments before any of those things, even in seminary, and so some of those things were starting to really challenge me. And it was, I don't know, maybe a few months into our friendship, maybe a little bit longer than that, when he asked me to come to a meeting with this one of his friends at a lunch meeting. And we met, and this guy came in, his name's Greg, and he sits down with me and he says, "Hey, Keith, I know you don't know me, but I know you. My daughter goes to your youth group." And I thought, oh man, I'm in trouble. She's a Catholic. She's coming to my Protestant youth group, but he's going to chew me out. And he says, she loves her faith. She's so excited about the stuff that she's learning. So I want to thank you for teaching her about Jesus. And I was like, okay. And then he said, and I'd like to invite you on an all expenses paid trip to come over to a place called Medjugorje and Rome. Now, of course, I didn't know what Medjugorje was about any of that, but I knew what Rome was.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, well, what's this all about? He said, I want to bring you on this trip. Devin's coming and some people from my church are coming and I'd love to bring you. So then we got the fortune cookie we were at a Chinese restaurant. I opened it up. It said, you will be going on. So I went on this trip and, what was interesting to me about being on this trip is I knew nothing about like the Virgin Mary or any of that kind of stuff. I didn't know anything about that. But what I did come to understand was this was the first time I had ever been around Catholics who worshiped Jesus with passion and who incorporated their love of the Blessed Mother into their worship of Jesus. I'd never seen that before. I'd just seen like robotic Catholics praying the rosary or whatever, but I'd never been around Catholics who actually had this passionate relationship with God and with Mary. So it had a big impact on me. When we got home, there was a couple times where I felt like I needed to think about converting. But again, I was stuck in this place where I've got a wife, I've got 3 kids, I've got a mortgage. This is my career ministry. And I just didn't know what to do with it. So ultimately, this was, back in like maybe 2002, 2003. I just kind of shut the whole thing down, said, I can't go there. It's too scary. And then for many years, I didn't even think about the Catholic Church anymore. So that's kind of how it began.
Right. Yeah. Wow. So, yeah. So it, all this stuff comes at you, especially all expense paid flight overseas. Yeah. And, viewing this through Protestant eyes, I imagine that probably would be kind of scary. Like all this stuff coming at you at once, you'd want to put it in the box and, put it aside for a while just because, like you said, it was kind of shocking you out of your worldview.
Yeah, I mean, I had a night when we were running our church camp and we were getting ready to have communion with the kids. And one of my pastor friends was getting ready to do the communion. And as he was talking about it, because in our world, we didn't really have like a liturgy, so to speak, and stuff like that. It was pretty low key, pretty loose. And the Lord just hit me and he was talking to me about the Eucharist. The Lord just hit me. He's like, I've got more for you than what you're experiencing. And I had this emotional breakdown right there at the camp. I went outside. I called my buddy Devin. I said, I think God's calling me to become Catholic.
Wow.
And he was like, okay. And he's like, he wants you to come home. But I thought he was going to rub it in my face that he was right, I was wrong. He didn't do that. But I was too afraid, honestly, Gary. I'm ashamed of that now. But I mean, at the time, I couldn't comprehend how this could be a thing. I couldn't figure it out because I'm supposed to be in ministry. I'm supposed to have this youth group. Like I hadn't really talked to anybody outside of Devin about these feelings I was having or the stuff I was learning. It was freaking me out. So I was just like, nope, I got to stuff it. And I just ignored it at the time. Yeah. But the stuff I was learning was blowing me away. It was incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. So did you incorporate any of that in your youth teaching? I have a friend who was going through that process, and he would hear all the Scott Hahn stuff and everything. Then he'd go to his Baptist church and impress everybody over there. Did you go through that phase?
I did a little bit back then, not much, but I did a little bit. It was later, years later, right before I actually converted, that I did a lot of that. But at the time, it was up here, and I wasn't sure what to make of it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So what got you to reconsider and, seriously move towards the church?
Well, okay. So fast forward about 10 years, life had its ups and downs, and I had left that church after a season and did some other things. I was a senior pastor for a little while in a little evangelical free church. I was a teaching pastor at an Assemblies of God church. And I ended up taking a position as basically like an associate at this big Methodist church in the town I live in now. And this was, I think, like 2012 2012, 2013-ish. And our denomination was going through, still is, going through a lot of terrible stuff, you know, like a lot of Protestant denominations, especially the mainline denominations. Many of them have split apart. Many of them are really becoming fractured over like certain social issues about like marriage and human sexuality, things like that. And I saw this happening, and I was, you know, I'm a pretty conservative person. The church I served was pretty conservative for the most part, but our denomination was beginning just to implode. And I found myself having all of these conversations with people who I disagreed with. And when we would talk about the issues, I would be trying to point them back to Scripture, and they would say things to me like, well, that's just your interpretation of the Scripture, you know? So then I was like, okay, I can't do that anymore. I got to go to tradition. Okay, I'll talk about what the church has always taught, you know? And I'm not thinking Catholic Church at the time. I'm thinking just the general Christian church. And I'm like, well, this is what the Christian church has taught for all these years, and you want to change everything. And they would say things like, well, yeah, you know, the church has had it wrong all this time, and we're here to update that and change it. And then I'm like, I was coming to a place where I realized that without an external authority to tell us how to interpret the Bible and to help us understand what the Christian faith actually teaches and is, then what I was seeing was this chaos unfolding right in front of me. And I knew that I had no answer to deal with that. And I had a conversation with a pastor friend of mine, and she said to me at one point in time, she said, well, then Keith, if you believe in all this tradition and authority, then why aren't you a Catholic? And it just like hit me, Gary. I was like, oh man, why did she say that? And right around that time, my friend Greg, the one who originally took me to Medjugorje all those years ago, he called me up and he said, hey, I want to take you to this movie. It's called Apparition Hill, and it's about Medjugorje. And I'm like, okay. So we go see this movie, and I hadn't even thought about any of that stuff for a long time, but it like sort of brought all these things back to the forefront, and it made me start to consider these things again. And like, it was just like this whole box just reopened, but I was in a much different place all these years later, and I was able to kind of wrestle through it a little bit differently. And I had this experience with the Virgin Mary that sort of like sealed the deal for me. And do we have time for me to talk about that, or we gotta? You know,
yeah, we're coming up on a break in about 15 seconds. So
okay, I'll save that for the other side of it.
Yeah, that's a good cliffhanger. Find out.
Methodist pastor's experience with the Virgin Mary leaves him in tears in his office. Stay tuned, right? That's what happened.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Well, hey, we're chatting with Keith Nestor, and who's a convert from pastorate in Protestantism to become Catholic, and now he, as you can tell, he's an on-fire Catholic evangelist in his own right. And so you listen to Hands On Apologetics, and there's more to come on the other side of the break. You don't want to miss what the Virgin Mary has in store for Keith. Stay tuned, folks.
Welcome, Daniel. You're on the line. What's on your mind, brother?
Hi, I just wanted to share a testimony about Virgin Most Powerful Radio. I had a buddy at work who, he's a lukewarm Catholic guy, and I wanted him to start listening to the Terry and Jesse show, so I kept telling him to download the app, and he kept putting me off. So one day, I grabbed his phone and I downloaded the app for him. I went on vacation, and I kept telling him to listen to it. He would kind of put me off. I came back from vacation. He comes to my cubicle, and he says to me, hey, man, I've been listening to Terry and Jesse's show, and it's great. And it's made a big impact in his life. The guy, he's going to weekly adoration a couple times a week. He goes to Mass in the morning. He's an on-fire Catholic, and he promotes the Terry and Jesse show in the Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
Daniel, what a testimony, and I want to encourage our listeners to get those cards by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org and do what Daniel's doing. Go out and spread the faith by inviting people to listen to Virgin Most Powerful. Daniel, thanks for your testimony, brother. God love you.
You're welcome.
Our nation is too full of those that are crying down. Down with the police, down with the churches, down with teachers, down with government, Can you build anything down? You cannot. Certainly time in our nation to change our words. And let's begin now to use the word up. Up from all of this filth. Up from this violence. Up from this indifference of courts. Up to the hid battlements of eternity. Up to God.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-on Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody, to Hands-on Apologetics. We're chatting with Keith Nestor about his journey into the Catholic Church from being a Protestant pastor, now doing lay ministry in the church. And Keith, right before the break, we're seeing all the denominational fracturing over social issues and so on, and you realize that appeals to history fall on deaf ears. And you said you're at the point where suddenly the Blessed Mother kind of steps into your life.
Yeah, so I was wrestling with a lot of these issues, and I remember still trying to find a way out of it. Trying to find a way to come to some other alternatives. Let's be real, I really didn't want to become a Catholic. I didn't want to do it. I mean, I'm a contemporary worship guy. I love preaching. I love being a pastor, and I'm thinking, man, is it Catholic Church where I should be? So I remember I was at a meeting once, and I interacted with this guy who's a president of a seminary, Methodist seminary, and I said to him one day, we were talking about these issues. He didn't know me at all. And I just said he had given this presentation about, why the church needs to be more biblical and all this stuff. And I said to him, well, can I ask you a question? If we don't have an authoritative external source of Christ's authority other than our own interpretation of the Bible, how do we get through this mess? What's our way through this? And he looks at me and he goes, well, it sucks to be Protestant, doesn't it? And then he laughed. And I was like, oh, man. So I'm like at the point where I'm like, I don't want to be Catholic, but I'm feeling backed into a corner, but I still have a few objections. Well, it came time for me to preach a sermon series in my Methodist church. We were going through Advent, and the title of the sermon series that we created, I team taught with my senior pastor, was Who Gets the News? And we talked about when different people received the good news that Jesus was coming. In the first week, I preached about when the angel Gabriel comes to Zechariah and shares with him, and Zechariah doesn't believe him, and of course the angel Gabriel makes him unable to speak. Well, then guess what happens in the next week, right? It's the Annunciation. So I'm going to preach a sermon in my church about the Annunciation, and I'm there in my office preparing it, and I start reading in Luke's Gospel, and I'm beginning to think about things, and I'm praying, and every time I go to the Scriptures and I start to work on this message, I'm overwhelmed with all of this emotion, and I feel this presence in my soul, and I'm right there, and I'm like starting to cry, and I'm like, I don't understand what's going on, and I can't figure it out. But stuff was coming to me, and I don't know if it was stuff I'd heard from before, but I created this sermon, and I preached it before my church, and it was all about how Mary is the new Eve. How Mary is the new Ark of the Covenant. I preached to my Protestant congregation about how when the angel Gabriel comes to Mary and gives her this incredible greeting, que caritomine, full of grace, and how what this means and why he was with Zechariah the week before and didn't do anything like that, and now he's with this young woman. What is it about her that's so special? See, I'm getting goosebumps now just talking about it, Gary. And the Holy Spirit just filled this. It just filled this room. He filled this space in this message, and people were crying. I had people coming up front after the sermon going, I've never heard anything like that before. What is that? They had no idea that this was basically like Catholic apologetics for the Virgin Mary. Well, it was incredible, and I could feel something was happening. And once I sort of like accepted that and recognized and just sort of like opened up my heart to her, she just took me and just said, okay, we're going to just go around all of your intellectual stuff, and we're just going to go right here in your heart. And then I was like, okay, I feel like this Catholic thing, there's more going on here than I could have ever understood. And now I have to really consider what I'm going to do.
Wow. So, yeah, what a moment. And, for apologists, people who defend the faith, we often think of the conversion as totally intellectual, but really you have to change people's hearts, and really it's a work of God.
Yeah.
And so your heart's changing as well. It isn't just you heard the arguments, but now you got to feel Catholic, I guess you could say, in your heart.
Well, what happens is I think intellectual arguments, and I know you're an apologist, so it's like I think apologetics has a limit, okay? Because it's about knowledge, and I think that we have to have that knowledge because that's what opens the door. But until we can connect that knowledge with our soul, and I think a lot of people get stuck at the knowledge level because they might have an objection to, let's say, purgatory or some doctrine of the Blessed Virgin Mary or whatever, and they can just live in that place. That's where I was. I was stuck in that place for a long time. But when you have an experience, like a personal experience with someone, and with the spiritual reality that is the Catholic faith, you have an experience that goes beyond knowledge, that it bypasses all that. And that's what happened to me.
Yeah.
And I knew I was a goner at that point in time. I knew I was like, okay, this is going to happen. But the night that I knew I had to convert was another powerful experience that I had with Jesus, where I had wound up in this, and it's too long of a story to tell all of it, but I'd wound up in this church in like Milan, Illinois. Steve Ray was coming to give a talk, and I wound up at this talk, and I walked into this Catholic church. I'm with my friend Greg, who's the one that took me to Medjugorje, and my friend Devin, okay, and then me. So the three of us, we go into this church. They're having mass. I go up and get my little blessing, and I kneel down before I just hit my knees off to the side, and I was looking at the crucifix, and I was praying. I said, Lord, if you want me to become Catholic, and I was tore up, Gary. I mean, it was ripping me apart. I said, if you want me to become Catholic, I will, but you've got to make a way, because what's that look like for a guy like me? What is it? It's not like I could just become Catholic. I mean, this was my career, 22 years.
Right.
And I said, you got to make a way. And as I prayed, the Lord spoke to my heart in a powerful way. And I don't say that about too many times in my life, but this was a powerful moment. And the Lord spoke to me from the crucifix. And we just received, they just received the Eucharist. So I know this is in the context of the Eucharist. And Jesus said to me, I am the way, the truth, and the life. You don't need me to make a way. You just need me. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I just remember feeling like I have to stop putting conditions on my obedience with this. I have to stop saying, okay, God, I'll do what you want me to do if you ... or if. There can't be any if, ands, or buts. And then Steve gets up and gives a talk about how the early church were willing to give their lives rather than deny their faith. And here I am being faced with the truth of the Catholic faith, and I'm not willing to do it because I don't know what I'm going to do for a job. So after that night, I went up and talked to Steve for a second. And I told him, my buddy actually said, this is my friend Keith. He's thinking about becoming Catholic. He's a pastor. And Steve, he handed me a copy of his book, Upon This Rock. And he said to me, I know where you are, brother. And he said, you either need to become Catholic right now or turn around and run the other way and never look back. And I knew what I had to do. On the way home, I told my friend Greg, I said, that's it. I'm doing this. I went home. I told my wife, Estelle, I said, hey, here's the deal. We're doing this. I'm resigning my job. Now, this time around, I had talked to her about it. She knew what was going on, and she was kind of not necessarily feeling called to be Catholic because she's a revert. She grew up in the church, and I pulled her out years and years ago. And so she's like, what? You want to be Catholic? And I said, yeah. And you know what she said to me, Gary? She said, if that's what the Lord's calling us to do, then that's what we need to do.
Wow.
And so the next day I went in and I resigned. And I told my pastor, I said, at my church, I'm like, look, you guys, this is what's happening. I'm being called to become a Roman Catholic, so I need to step out of this. They couldn't believe it. They were just like, what are you talking about? But that was in, I think, spring of 2017.
Wow. Yeah. So So you leave your pastorate, you become Catholic. Really quick, what was your experience, leaving the environment you were in and then joining a Catholic parish in the area?
It was incredible. The day I joined the church, I didn't go through RCIA. I just met with our priest one-on-one for a few months, and I had my first confession, which was incredible. And then the day I went to join the church was October 8th, 2017. And when I received the Eucharist for the first time, then after that it was time to pass the peace. I feel a tap on my shoulder. I turn around, and it's Steve Ray. He happened to be in our church at that mass at that time, and he says, "Welcome home, brother." I don't even know if he remembered who I was, but he said, "Welcome home, brother." And so, yeah, there was a culture shock to it, which is why I wrote my book, which I'll tell you about in a second. But I was so excited to be home. Like, it was, to me, it felt and still feels like I had been, living my life on Happy Meals, and now I was sitting down to a gourmet meal, the best meal I'd ever had in my life. And every day I am so in love with my Catholic faith. It's been amazing. Yeah, there's been challenges. I had plenty of people who wrote me off and tell me I'm crazy and don't want anything to do with me. All the stuff that a lot of converts go through, I've been through all that, losing your job and trying to figure out how you're going to live and everything, all that. But I can tell you this, every sacrifice I've ever made seems like nothing compared to what the Lord has brought into my life through being a Catholic. It's been just incredible.
Wow, that's beautiful. Well, we only have a couple more minutes, and I want to talk about your current ministry.
Okay.
All the stuff you're doing on the web, and tell us about your book as well.
Well, so, yeah, this is my book. It's called The Convert's Guide to Roman Catholicism, Your First Year in the Church. This book was basically given to me by the Lord on a download. And someone had said, "You should write a book." I'm like, "I'll never write a book." And then in the middle of prayer, it was just boom, it hit me. And so I wrote this book, which is basically, it's not an apologetics book. It's a book about what it's like to be a convert. And it's called Your First Year in the Church. So what do you need to know? What do you need to do? What do you need to not do? So that book has really led me into a whole world of ministry. I started giving talks about a year after my conversion. And some of those talks I put on YouTube, and it started to grow a YouTube channel, which I never ever thought I would do, which has led me basically, in February of this year, I looked at Estelle and I'm like, "Hey, I need to jump into this." So I went full time into evangelism ministry. I don't call myself an apologist, but I make a lot of videos that talk about the Catholic faith, conversion. I do a live stream every day where we pray the rosary that we've been doing since March 18th of this year. It's called the Rosary Crew, where every single day we've prayed the rosary. And that group has exploded. It's thousands of people every day now that are live streaming with us. And I have a ministry called Down to Earth Ministry that exists to teach the truths of the Catholic faith in a clear, engaging, and impactful manner. Got a podcast called Catholic Feedback. I've just been grabbing a hold of this and just saying, "Okay, Lord, I'm going to do everything I can possibly do to tell people about the faith and help people in their journey." And God's really been faithful to me and blessed me with a lot of opportunities. That's awesome. And what's the address so people can check it out? So my website is down2earthministry.org. So down2earthministry.org. And the podcast is called Catholic Feedback with Keith Nestor. And on YouTube, you can just find me at Keith Nestor. You'll find it. Well, hey, Keith, thanks so much. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for having me, Gary. I appreciate you and everything that you guys do. All right. Well, thank you. And that's Keith Nestor. Yeah, check it out, folks. Lots of great stuff. Very cool book. And, man, the hour has flown. Coming up next, High Impact Catholic Talk with the Terry and Jesse Show. And thank you so much for listening. God bless.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church. So I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.